There are people who walk through the world differently, not because they choose to, but because something within them has shifted, quietly, irrevocably. They see what others pass by. They hear what others dismiss as noise. They feel the weight of what remains unspoken in every room they enter. You might have met someone like this. Perhaps you are someone like this. They don't announce themselves. They don't carry signs of their transformation. But if you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll notice something in their eyes, a certain stillness, a depth that suggests they've been somewhere most people never go and returned carrying something they can't quite name. This is the invisible vision of someone who's spiritually awakened, and it is in equal measure a gift and a burden that few truly understand. Because here's what no one tells you about awakening. It doesn't make life easier. It makes it truer. And truth, unfiltered and undeniable, can be the heaviest thing you'll ever carry. When you begin to see clearly, when the veil lifts and you perceive the mechanisms behind human behavior, the patterns beneath suffering, the illusions that keep most people comfortable, you step into a kind of solitude that has no name. You become fluent in a language that has no words. You recognize truths that have no proof. And in that recognition, something fundamental changes. You can no longer pretend. You can no longer hide in the convenient stories that make life manageable for everyone else. Thomas Merton knew this. He understood that the awakened person lives in two worlds simultaneously, the world as it appears and the world as it is. And the distance between these two realities becomes the terrain of their daily existence. A terrain they must navigate alone, because most people are not ready to leave the comfort of appearances. Imagine for a moment what it's like to sit in a room full of people, hearing not just their words, but the unspoken fears beneath them. Feeling not just the atmosphere, but the collective anxiety that everyone agrees not to acknowledge. Seeing not just faces, but masks. Beautiful, carefully constructed masks that protect fragile identities from the truth of their own impermanence. This is not judgment. The awakened person doesn't look down on others for sleeping. How could they? They remember what it was like to sleep. They remember the comfort of not knowing, the peace of not seeing, the simplicity of believing the stories everyone tells. But once you've woken up, you cannot will yourself back to sleep. You cannot unsee what you've seen. You cannot unknow what you've learned about the nature of self, the illusion of separation, the infinite game of seeking that keeps most people running in circles their entire lives. And so begins the paradox. The awakened person sees connection everywhere, the fundamental unity beneath all apparent division. Yet they often feel profoundly alone. They understand that suffering is optional, a product of resistance and attachment. Yet they feel the suffering of others more acutely than most people feel their own. They recognize that nothing truly matters in the cosmic sense, yet everything matters more deeply than words can express. This is the invisible vision, not the dramatic, mystical experiences. Not the moments of transcendence, but the quiet, persistent awareness that changes how you move through ordinary life. The way you listen to someone speak and hear all the things they're not saying. The way you watch people chase after things that will never fulfill them, and feel a tenderness so profound it borders on grief. Because you remember being that person. You remember the hunger that couldn't be satisfied, the fear that couldn't be soothed, the questions that had no answers until you stopped asking and started being. Once I knew someone who described their awakening not as enlightenment, but as a kind of homesickness for a place they'd never been. They said it felt like remembering something they'd always known, but had forgotten how to access. And with that remembering came a responsibility they never asked for, to see clearly in a world that prefers the comfort of confusion. This person would sit in meetings at work, listening to people argue about things that, in the grand scheme, meant nothing, watching egos clash over territory that didn't exist, seeing fear masquerading as ambition, insecurity dressed up as confidence, pain hiding behind productivity. And they would feel this strange mixture of compassion and exhaustion, love and loneliness, understanding and isolation. Because how do you explain to someone that the thing they're fighting for is the very thing keeping them trapped? How do you tell someone that the identity they're defending so fiercely is not who they actually are? How do you speak truth to those who've built their entire lives on comfortable lies? You don't. That's what the awakened person learns. You don't try to wake people up. You can't. Awakening isn't something you do to someone else. It's something that happens within them, in its own time, through its own mysterious process. All you can do is be present. All you can offer is your own embodied truth. All you can give is the silent transmission of someone who's walked through the fire and emerged not burned, but somehow more alive. This is where the invisible vision becomes most challenging. Because the awakened person can see potential everywhere. They can see the beauty trapped inside people's defenses. They can see the wisdom hidden beneath people's confusion. They can see the love waiting to be discovered under layers of fear and hurt and conditioning. And it breaks their heart. Over and over again it breaks their heart. Not in a melodramatic way. Not in a way that makes them bitter or resentful, but in a way that keeps them tender, keeps them open, keeps them willing to witness the human struggle with patience and grace, even when that struggle is so unnecessary. Even when the freedom people seek is already here, already available, already waiting in the space between their thoughts. The awakened person walks through the world like someone who's learned a secret, and the secret is this: you are not who you think you are. The voice in your head is not you. The story you tell about yourself is not you. The role you play, the image you project, the identity you defend, none of it is you. You are the awareness that witnesses all of this. You are the space in which all experience arises. You are the consciousness that has been here all along, prior to every thought, beneath every emotion, beyond every circumstance. This knowing changes everything, and it changes nothing. Life continues. Bills still need to be paid. Relationships still require attention. The body still gets tired. The mind still generates thoughts. But the identification with all of it loosens. The grip of believing you are your circumstances relaxes. The urgency that drives most people begins to dissolve, replaced by something else. Not apathy, not detachment in the cold sense, but a kind of engaged presence that can hold both the beauty and the suffering of existence without needing to fix, change, or escape any of it. This is what makes the awakened person seem strange to others. They don't react the way people expect them to react. They don't chase what others chase. They don't fear what others fear. They can be fully present in moments of difficulty without being consumed by them. They can feel deeply without being overwhelmed. They can care profoundly without needing to control outcomes. And people don't know what to make of this. Some find it peaceful. Some find it unsettling. Some mistake it for indifference. Some recognize it as the very thing they've been seeking their entire lives without knowing how to name it. But here's the danger that no one talks about. The awakened person can lose themselves in a different way. Not in the egoic confusion that traps most people, but in the dissolution of boundaries that comes with seeing everything as one. They can become so attuned to others' emotions that they forget to honor their own. They can become so compassionate toward others' suffering that they neglect their own needs. They can become so identified with being spiritual or conscious that they create a new, more subtle prison. Because the ego is clever, it doesn't just die when you awaken. It adapts. It finds new territory. It becomes the spiritual ego, the one that knows, the one that sees, the one that has transcended. And this can be more insidious than the ordinary ego because it's harder to recognize, dressed as it is in the clothing of humility and wisdom. The truly awakened person must wake up from this too, must recognize when they're using their insight to feel superior, must notice when they're using their awareness as armor against intimacy, must see when they're hiding behind detachment instead of risking the vulnerability of true presence. This is the ongoing work. Not a destination reached, but a continual returning. A constant remembering. A persistent practice of dying to who you think you should be and allowing what's true to emerge moment by moment. And in this practice, something paradoxical happens. The more you let go of needing to be special, the more extraordinary your ordinary life becomes. The more you release your attachment to enlightenment, the more enlightened your existence feels. The more you stop trying to maintain your awakening, the more natural it becomes to simply be awake. You start to notice beauty in places you never looked before, in the way light falls across a table, in the silence between words, in the breath that happens without your direction, in the aliveness that pulses through everything, animate and inanimate alike. You start to feel connected, not because you're trying to feel connected, but because separation reveals itself as the illusion it always was. Not philosophically, not conceptually, but experientially, in your bones, in your being. In the undeniable recognition that the boundaries between you and everything else are permeable, arbitrary, ultimately illusory. And yet, you still honor them. Because this is the great paradox of awakening. You recognize that you are everything, and you simultaneously honor your human form as a particular expression of that everything. You don't transcend your humanity. You finally, fully inhabit it. You become more yourself by realizing you're not only yourself. This is what Thomas Merton pointed to when he spoke of the true self versus the false self. The false self is the constructed identity, the social mask, the version of you that was created to survive and be accepted. The true self is what remains when all that falls away. Not nothing, not a void, but a presence, a consciousness, an awareness that has always been here, watching the play of identity unfold. And when you touch this true self, even briefly, everything shifts. Because you realize you've been looking for yourself in all the wrong places. You've been seeking wholeness in achievements, relationships, experiences, possessions, when wholeness is what you already are, prior to all seeking. The invisible vision of the awakened person is seeing this in everyone, seeing the true self hiding beneath the false self, seeing the Buddha nature, the divine spark, the consciousness that animates every human being regardless of how deeply it's been buried under conditioning and trauma and fear. This seeing is an act of love, not sentimental love, not romantic love, but love as recognition, love as acknowledging the sacred in the ordinary, love as meeting the truth of what is without needing to change it into what should be. And this is perhaps the most challenging aspect of awakening, accepting what is. Not as a passive resignation, but as a profound yes to life as it presents itself. This doesn't mean you don't take action. It doesn't mean you accept harmful situations or allow injustice to continue unchallenged, but it means you stop fighting with reality. You stop believing that your resistance to what is will somehow make it different. You realize that all your suffering comes from this resistance, from wanting the present moment to be other than it is, from arguing with what has already happened, from believing that your judgments about good and bad, right and wrong, are absolute truths rather than conditioned perspectives. When you stop resisting, something miraculous happens. Not dramatic, not flashy, but miraculous nonetheless. You discover a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a joy that isn't contingent on external conditions. A love that flows freely because it's no longer blocked by fear and judgment and the constant need to protect a self that isn't real anyway. This is what the awakened person carries silently. This peace, this joy, this love, not as achievements, but as their natural state when everything false falls away. And they carry it not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, not to be special, but simply because it's what remains when the noise quiets and the seeking stops. But even this can become a trap. Because the mind wants to grasp it, hold it, make it permanent. The ego wants to claim it as an achievement. The false self wants to use it as evidence of superiority. And the moment you try to possess your awakening, you've lost it. The moment you think you've arrived, you've gone back to sleep. So the awakened person learns to hold everything lightly, to welcome insight without clinging to it, to experience clarity without needing to maintain it, to touch truth without trying to own it. They learn that awakening is not a state to achieve but a recognition to return to, again and again, moment by moment. They learn that spirituality is not about transcending human experience, but about fully inhabiting it with awareness. It's not about rising above emotions, but about feeling them completely without being defined by them. It's not about conquering the ego, but about seeing through it, understanding its mechanisms and choosing not to let it run your life. And in this learning, they discover something that changes how they relate to everything. That the spiritual journey is not about becoming someone different. It's about recognizing who you've always been beneath all the layers of conditioning. It's about coming home to yourself, about remembering what you forgot, about awakening from the dream of separation into the reality of connection. This recognition brings both grief and relief. Grief for all the years spent searching outside yourself for what was always within. Relief in finally stopping, finally resting, finally allowing yourself to simply be without the constant pressure to become. I remember meeting someone once who had spent decades seeking enlightenment. They had studied with teachers, practiced meditation for thousands of hours, read countless books, attended endless retreats. And one day, sitting in their garden watching their dog play, they suddenly understood. Not through effort, not through practice, not through seeking, but through a simple moment of being present with what was already here. They told me it wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no cosmic revelations, just a quiet recognition that they had been looking for something they'd never lost, that the peace they sought was always available, just beneath the noise of their searching. That awakening was not something to achieve, but something to allow. And with that recognition came a fundamental shift, not in what they did, but in how they did it. Not in their circumstances, but in how they related to them. Not in the content of their thoughts, but in their relationship to thinking itself. They still experienced challenges, still felt emotions, still had preferences and desires, but these things no longer controlled them. They arose and passed like weather, while something deeper remained constant. A ground of being, a presence that witnessed everything without being touched by anything. This is what the invisible vision reveals, that beneath all the chaos and confusion of human existence, there is a stillness that has never been disturbed. Beneath all the noise of the mind, there is a silence that has never been broken. Beneath all the changing forms of experience, there is an awareness that has never changed, and you are that stillness, that silence, that awareness, not as a concept to understand, but as a reality to recognize, not as a goal to achieve, but as the truth that's always been here, patiently waiting for you to notice. The awakened person sees this not only in themselves, but in everyone they meet. They see the sleeping Buddha in the businessman rushing past. They see the hidden light in the addict, lost in their addiction. They see the unrecognized divinity in the person drowning in their pain. And they hold space for it all without needing to save anyone or fix anything, because they understand that everyone is on their own journey. Everyone is awakening in their own time. Everyone is finding their way home through their own unique path of suffering and seeking and eventually surrender. The awakened person's role is not to drag people toward enlightenment. It's not to convince anyone of anything. It's not to prove the validity of their own experience. It's simply to be a reminder, to be a mirror, to be a presence that reflects back the possibility of peace, the reality of wholeness, the truth of who we really are beneath all our stories and strategies and survival mechanisms. This is not always comfortable for others, because the awakened person's presence can be confronting, not because they judge or criticize, but because their mere existence challenges the unexamined life. Their peace questions the necessity of constant anxiety. Their presence reveals the exhaustion of constant doing. Their acceptance highlights the suffering of constant resistance, and so they're often misunderstood, called detached when they're actually more present than most people ever manage to be, called passive when they're actually engaged with life more fully because they're not constantly fighting it, called naive when they've actually seen more deeply into the nature of reality than those who call them that could imagine. But the awakened person learns to be okay with this misunderstanding, not because they don't care what others think, but because they've released the need for external validation. They know what they know. They see what they see. And no amount of agreement or disagreement from others changes the truth of their direct experience. This is perhaps the greatest freedom awakening brings, liberation from the opinion of others. Not in a defensive or rebellious way, but in a simple, peaceful recognition that others' perceptions of you are their business, not yours. That who you really are exists prior to and independent of anyone's judgments, including your own. And yet, paradoxically, this freedom often makes the awakened person more considerate of others, not less. Because when you're not constantly defending yourself, you have energy available for genuine connection. When you're not trying to prove your worth, you can simply appreciate others for who they are. When you're not seeking validation, you can offer authentic presence without agenda. This is what makes the awakened person a healing presence, even when they're doing nothing to heal anyone. Their energy doesn't carry the usual human patterns of need, manipulation, control, or defense. It's simply clear, open, available. And in that clarity, others can sometimes glimpse their own potential for peace. Not always, not even usually, but sometimes. And those moments matter more than any words could express. Because the truth is, awakening doesn't spread through teaching or preaching or convincing. It spreads through resonance, through recognition, through one person's embodied presence, reminding another of what they've forgotten, through a moment of meeting that goes deeper than personality, deeper than story, into the shared ground of being that connects all of us. This is the invisible transmission that Thomas Merton spoke of, the wordless teaching that happens when one awake person meets another, or when an awake person meets someone ready to wake up. It's not about information transfer, it's about energy, vibration, frequency. It's about one nervous system regulating another, one presence creating space for another presence to emerge, and the awakened person learns to trust this process, to not force it, to not manipulate it, to simply show up, be real, be present, and let whatever wants to happen, happen. They learn that their job is not to change the world, but to be themselves so completely that their very existence becomes an invitation for others to do the same. Not through perfection, not through having it all figured out, but through the radical honesty of being human while simultaneously recognizing they're more than human. This is the dance, the beautiful, messy, paradoxical dance of awakening, holding the absolute and the relative, the eternal and the temporal, the infinite and the finite, being nobody and somebody simultaneously, caring deeply while remaining unattached to outcomes. And in this dance, life becomes lighter. Not because challenges disappear, but because you stop making them mean something about your worth or your progress or your spiritual status. You stop using difficulty as evidence that you're doing it wrong, or that you've failed, or that awakening isn't real. You simply meet what arises with presence, with curiosity, with the willingness to be with whatever is without needing to change it, escape it, or understand it completely. This is the invisible vision in action. Not seeing visions, not having mystical experiences, but seeing through the veil of story into the reality of what is. Being present with life as it unfolds, moment by moment, breath by breath, without the constant narration that most people mistake for living. And in this presence, something shifts. The quality of your attention changes everything it touches. Ordinary moments become sacred. Simple interactions become profound. The mundane reveals its hidden depths. Not because you're imposing meaning onto life, but because you're finally present enough to notice the meaning that's always been there. The awakened person walks through the world like someone who's found water in the desert and wants everyone to know it's available. But they also understand that you can't make someone drink. You can't convince someone they're thirsty. All you can do is quench your own thirst so completely that your satisfaction becomes visible. Your peace becomes palpable. Your joy becomes contagious, not through effort but through authenticity. This is not about being perfect. The awakened person doesn't become inhuman. They don't transcend all difficulty. They don't stop having bad days or difficult emotions or moments of confusion. But they stop believing those things mean something ultimate about who they are. They learn to hold it all, the light and the dark, the clarity and the confusion, the opening and the contraction, with equal acceptance. Because they understand that all of it is part of being human. All of it belongs. All of it is welcomed in the vast space of awareness that they've discovered themselves to be. And in this welcoming, something heals. Not through fixing or forcing, but through acceptance. Not through resistance or rejection, but through inclusion. Not through spiritual bypassing or positive thinking, but through the profound yes to all of life, exactly as it is. This is perhaps the deepest teaching of awakening, that peace is not found by escaping life, but by fully embracing it, that freedom is not achieved by transcending human experience, but by diving into it completely, without the armor of story or the defense of identity. The awakened person has learned to be naked before life, vulnerable, open, defenseless in the most profound sense. Not because they're weak, but because they've discovered that their true nature can't be hurt, that who they really are exists beyond harm, beyond threat, beyond the reach of anything that happens in the relative world of form. This doesn't make them reckless. It makes them brave. Brave enough to feel everything, brave enough to love without guarantees, brave enough to live fully in a world where everything is temporary and nothing can be held onto. And in this bravery, they become more alive than they ever were when they were trying to protect themselves from life, more present than they ever were when they were lost in thought, more real than they ever were when they were performing for others' approval. They become simply themselves, not the constructed self, not the social self, not the spiritual self, just this. Just what's here when everything extra falls away. Just awareness being aware of itself through this particular form, in this particular moment, under these particular circumstances. And this, finally, is enough. More than enough. Everything. In the end, the invisible vision of someone who's spiritually awakened is nothing special and everything important. It's not about seeing things others can't see in some supernatural sense. It's about seeing clearly what's always been here, the sacred ordinary, the divine mundane, the infinite expressing itself through the finite in every moment. It's about recognizing that you don't need to become spiritual because you already are spirit, animating this body, living this life, breathing this breath. You don't need to achieve awakening because awareness is your nature, prior to all achieving. You just need to stop, look, listen, feel, be present. And notice what's already here, waiting patiently beneath all your seeking, all your striving, all your suffering. Notice the stillness beneath the movement, the silence beneath the noise, the peace beneath the chaos, the love beneath the fear, the truth beneath the story. This is the invisible vision. This is the awakened life. This is what becomes possible when you finally stop running and allow yourself to arrive exactly where you've always been. Here, now, alive, aware, and utterly, completely home.